A major storm system is on the way, and it's about to bring another round of dangerous weather along with a surprising blast of cool air. Over the next couple of days, wave after wave of severe thunderstorms will sweep from the high plains through the Midwest and down into the Gulf Coast, and these storms won't be messing around. We're talking damaging wind gusts, hail the size of baseballs, and yes, a few tornadoes could spin up along the way. But behind all of this chaos, there's actually some good news hiding. A cold air mass is dropping down out of Canada, and it's going to slam into the Great Lakes, giving that region an early preview of fall weather starting today and continuing into tomorrow. Meanwhile, down south, the heat and humidity aren't backing off one bit. And to make things even more interesting, we've now got 2 tropical disturbances stirring in the Atlantic that we need to keep a close eye on. Honestly, this whole setup is the kind of unpredictable, chaotic weather pattern that might remind you of an ex who couldn't decide what they wanted. So let's not waste any more time and jump straight into today's forecast, because there's a lot to unpack. We're going to start with the severe weather threat because that's the story dominating the next several days. For today, which is Monday, there are 4 separate slight risk zones on the map. One sits up in the far northern plains, another stretches across the high plains, a third is centered over Louisiana and Mississippi, and the fourth runs along the Carolina coast. On top of those 4 zones, there's also a broad marginal risk area covering a huge chunk of the Great Plains. The headline threat for today is destructive straight-line wind. And we're not talking about a light breeze here. Some of these gusts could reach as high as 85 miles per hour. And that kind of wind threat stretches from Grand Forks and Fargo all the way down toward Denver and even reaches into the northeastern corner of Nevada. Beyond the wind, we also need to watch for scattered damaging gusts rolling through the Gulf Coast and up along the Carolina shoreline. There's also a solid chance of large hail today because a handful of supercell thunderstorms are expected to fire up this afternoon. The best chance for those hail-producing supercells sits over Nebraska and southern South Dakota. And right along the border between North Dakota and Minnesota, forecasters expect at least a few supercells to develop as well. And those storms could drop hail as big as baseballs, which is genuinely dangerous if you're caught outside or driving through it. As for tornadoes today, North Dakota carries the primary risk, where 1 or 2 isolated tornadoes could spin up from those discrete supercells. There's also a lower-end tornado risk sitting along the Carolina coast near Cape Hatteras, where a couple of supercells could form and potentially produce a tornado or 2, on top of heavy rainfall that raises the risk of flash flooding in that same area. So basically, the Carolina coastline is dealing with a double threat today: flash flooding and isolated tornadoes happening at the same time. And here's an important safety note. If a tornado warning does get issued in North Carolina today, there's a strong chance that tornado will be wrapped in heavy rain, which makes it much harder to see coming. So if you're in that warning area, please take it seriously and get to safety immediately. This isn't going to be one of those clearly visible tornadoes you see in the movies. Moving into Tuesday, the severe weather threat doesn't take a day off. It shifts a bit, spreading from the central plains up into the upper Midwest, while a separate area of concern develops in the southeast. The main worry on Tuesday is once again damaging wind, especially across Kansas and Nebraska, where gusts could once again reach up to 85 miles per hour. There's also a chance of scattered damaging wind gusts stretching from the Minneapolis area up toward Duluth. In fact, forecasters at the Storm Prediction Center have hinted that a slight risk category might get added to that upper Midwest zone in a future update. Large hail on Tuesday looks like it will be a more isolated concern rather than a widespread one, so nothing too extreme is expected there. A couple of tornadoes are possible too, mainly in the stretch from Eau Claire, Wisconsin up towards Duluth, and potentially even as far as International Falls. Given how active this setup looks, there's a real chance of a live stream happening tomorrow to track it in real time, so if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time to do that so you don't miss it. Then on Wednesday, the severe weather threat shifts again, this time settling into the Midwest and Great Lakes region, and we'll dig into exactly what that looks like in just a moment. But first, let's slow down and walk through the timing of all this severe weather day by day, starting with what's unfolding right now today. Most of today's severe weather activity is going to be concentrated in the northern plains. By this afternoon, expect a cluster of thunderstorms to fire up, and while most of them will move together as a cluster, 1 or 2 storms could remain discrete, meaning they act more independently. Those discrete storms will have enough wind shear working in their favor that an isolated tornado can't be ruled out. That said, the bigger overall concern will be large hail and destructive wind gusts near Grand Forks, Fargo, and even western Minnesota this evening, as this cluster of storms drifts south and southeast. Once we get past this evening, the severe threat should quiet down significantly overnight, with very little activity expected. Still, if you live in North Dakota, South Dakota, or far western Minnesota, stay alert through the evening for damaging winds, large hail, and the possibility of an isolated tornado. Elsewhere, Nebraska and South Dakota could see a few more supercells pop up again today, similar to what's been happening the past several days, bringing wind, hail, and maybe a brief tornado, though the overall risk there looks fairly low. Tuesday is shaping up to be the more significant severe weather day, at least in my opinion, and what makes it more concerning is that the threat could impact a more heavily populated stretch of the Midwest. A low-pressure system will be spinning up over Canada, and that setup should be enough to trigger supercell thunderstorms. Current model guidance suggests the most intense, severe weather during the early to mid-afternoon will focus on northeastern Minnesota, where there should be enough wind shear to support an isolated tornado, although damaging wind and large hail remain the primary hazards there. As we move into the evening hours, additional storms could fire up in western Wisconsin, east of Minneapolis, and if any of those storms organize into supercells, we could see a non-zero tornado risk layered on top of the wind and hail threats. Wind shear is expected to be abundant thanks to this being more of a surface-based low-pressure system, so this is an area worth watching closely as Tuesday afternoon transitions into evening. If you're further south in Nebraska or Kansas, Tuesday is looking like a genuinely stormy day, with numerous storms expected to develop. Damaging wind will be the dominant threat, particularly near Kearney, Salina, and Hayes. There's also a chance that these storms organize into a mesoscale convective system, which is essentially a long line of thunderstorms that can move through and cause widespread wind damage during the mid to late afternoon and into the early evening before eventually breaking apart. The tornado risk in this particular area is expected to stay quite low. By Wednesday, the same storm system that had been spinning over Canada will start drifting toward Lake Huron, and this shift should spark a fresh round of storms developing around Lake Michigan during the afternoon. In this environment, atmospheric instability is expected to build significantly, stretching all the way from Kansas City up into northern Michigan. The zone with the best chance for significant severe weather looks to be near Chicago and Peoria. There will be enough wind shear present to support another low-end tornado threat, but once again, damaging wind and isolated hail are expected to be the primary hazards overall. A couple of tornadoes are possible, especially as we approach the 5 to 10 p.m. window on Wednesday evening, and the area to watch stretches from Springfield, Illinois, up toward Grand Rapids and potentially even near Fort Wayne. This activity will likely begin as a couple of scattered supercells before clustering into a line of storms, which should then weaken as we move into early Thursday morning. Honestly, the next several days are shaping up to be pretty intense from a severe weather standpoint. It's actually kind of remarkable how active this month of August has been so far. In my experience, we haven't seen an August this active in roughly 5 years. And unfortunately, there's no clear sign that this pattern is going to slow down anytime soon. After Wednesday's system moves through, it will push into the northeast, spreading showers and thunderstorms across a wide swath of territory stretching from Atlanta, Georgia, all the way up toward Quebec. Then, on Friday, yet another storm system is expected to develop over the Midwest and Central Plains, which should bring another round of isolated severe weather to Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Kansas. Saturday looks like it could ramp things up even further, and honestly, both Saturday and Sunday have the potential to bring a few significant supercells with essentially the full range of severe hazards on the table, including large hail, damaging wind, and tornadoes. I know it might sound like a stretch to be this confident about a threat that's still 5 or 6 days out, but multiple weather models have actually been consistently hinting at this outcome for the past 2 days. Even the Storm Prediction Center has acknowledged that a slight risk designation might be needed in future outlooks for the area stretching from Chicago down toward Kansas. So Saturday and Sunday are shaping up to be genuinely active, severe weather days. Sunday in particular looks like it will shift the focus back toward the far northern plains as another storm system forms over southern Canada near Saskatchewan. Then, moving into the following Monday, that same storm system could bring yet another round of severe weather back into the Midwest. In other words, the final stretch of August is set up to be extremely active, likely producing several more rounds of severe weather before we transition into the first week of September. What happens after that is still pretty uncertain, but there's an interesting wrinkle worth mentioning. The GFS model has actually been hinting at the possibility of snow in the Rockies by the first week of September. Now, that's far from guaranteed and could easily not pan out, but it's a strong signal that this active, chaotic weather pattern is likely to persist, even as we transition into a new month. Now let's talk about temperatures, because honestly, that's been one of the bigger storylines over the past several days. Just look at what's happening across the Midwest and Great Lakes this morning. Temperatures have dropped into the 40s in many spots, with some areas in northern Wisconsin and the upper peninsula of Michigan even dipping into the upper 30s. Meanwhile, down near Dallas, the morning low temperature is sitting in the mid-80s. That's an absolutely brutal contrast. And if you live in Texas or Oklahoma, get ready, because temperatures are expected to climb into the triple digits today and tomorrow, And honestly, the heat looks likely to stick around for roughly the next 7 days. On the flip side, if you're in the Midwest or Northeast, this pleasant, cooler stretch of weather isn't going anywhere anytime soon, especially with all these storm systems continuing to roll through the region. The next real shot of noticeably colder air looks likely to arrive on Friday in Minnesota and Wisconsin, where temperatures could once again dip into the 40s and 50s overnight. At the same time, heat is expected to build back into the Great Plains, particularly from Kansas down through Dallas by Friday. Then, as we move into Saturday and Sunday, that heat is expected to expand further north, and this shift in the atmosphere should once again set the stage for a more significant severe weather day somewhere across the Central Plains, possibly extending into the Midwest and Ohio Valley. Temperatures are expected to spike noticeably in cities like Kansas City and St. Louis during this stretch. Looking further ahead, by the first week of September, there's a chance we could see another surge of cold air pushing into the Northeast and Midwest, and there's even a possibility of unusually cold air showing up in the Pacific Northwest, depending on how all these storm systems evolve over the coming week. Of course, there's still plenty of time between now and then for things to change, but right now it does look like September could actually kick off on a fairly cool note across large parts of the country. Now let's shift gears and talk about the tropics, because activity out there is really ramping up. This is happening primarily in the Pacific, but the Atlantic Ocean is also starting to show multiple areas of development, which is worth paying close attention to. Right now, there are a couple of tropical storms churning away in the Pacific Ocean, but the more pressing story is what's brewing in the Atlantic. There's now roughly a 50% chance of tropical formation over the next 7 days within the main development region. On top of that, there's a growing chance, also around 50%, of another tropical system forming just east of Bermuda over the next couple of days. The Bermuda area system likely won't have much impact on the United States, though it could generate some dangerous rip currents along the New England coastline as we approach the middle of the week. If this system does end up forming, it's expected to track up toward Nova Scotia and could bring some heavy rainfall with it. But the real story to watch is the disturbance in the main development region, because this one appears to have the best shot at pushing through the wind shear. That has been tearing apart nearly every tropical system that's tried to form in the Atlantic so far this year. If it manages to overcome that shear, it could eventually strengthen into a full hurricane, which means we need to track the system very closely over the coming days. Over the next couple of days, confidence is actually growing that this disturbance could become a tropical storm as early as Wednesday, while it's still sitting in the main development region. One hurricane-focused model even shows the system intensifying into a hurricane fairly quickly, and by Friday, it could potentially become a fairly powerful storm. What happens after Friday, though, is much less certain. Right now, the GFS model keeps the system fairly intense, but has it tracking generally out to sea rather than curving toward the Lesser Antilles, which is good news for those islands, at least for the moment. Most of the other models and ensemble members are also keeping the system away from the islands entirely, which is a reassuring sign, though of course things could still shift since the system hasn't even fully formed yet. There is a high-pressure system in place that's expected to help steer the storm north before it ever gets close to the Caribbean Sea. Then, as we move into early next week, right around the start of September, this system is expected to continue tracking northward. Some of the ensemble model members bring it a little closer to Bermuda, but the majority of models and ensemble groupings keep it well out to sea, which means it doesn't currently look like this storm will directly impact any populated areas or countries. That said, we'll absolutely keep monitoring this closely and update you as soon as anything changes, because we are right in the thick of hurricane season, and things can escalate quickly once a system like this actually organizes, especially since this tropical wave looks like a strong candidate to become the next named tropical storm. And that wraps up today's forecast. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any updates. There's a real possibility of a live stream tomorrow and again on Wednesday, given how active this pattern is looking, so make sure you turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you catch it the moment it goes live. We'll see you in the next video, or maybe even in the live stream.